everyone. I'm Paige Smith with After School, a podcast project from Simon Fraser University's Faculty of Communication, Art, and Technology. After School showcases FCAT alumni in traditional and unconventional career paths across communications, interactive art and technology, contemporary arts, publishing, and digital media. We would like to respectfully acknowledge the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Kwikwetlem, FCAT, Kwantlen, Semiahmoo and Tsawwassen peoples whose unceded traditional territories our three campuses reside. In today's episode of After School, the School of Interactive Art and Technology student Amena Salman speaks with Jordan Yep, a junior product designer at Jostle, an employee success program. They discuss the leap from working in school to higher pressure employment situations, the challenges of finding junior design positions in a post-pandemic market, and creating bigger impacts in smaller settings. I hope you enjoy the episode.
One of the greatest lessons I learned from a mentor was that in your 20s is the time to learn, and in your 30s is the time to earn.
Hi everyone, today in the studio we are welcoming Jordan Yep. Jordan is a recent-ish graduate, 2020, so it hasn't been too long, and he's currently working as a junior product designer at Jostle, and also runs a podcast too, so I'm really excited to have someone who is also into podcasting like I am. But without further ado, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself a little bit better than me, so go ahead.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. It's definitely different to be back at a digital studio rather than like an in-person studio back like in the FCAT days.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not in Studio B. That was like the plan. That was like the goal with this. I was like, take me back into Studio B and we'll get together.
Oh man, anyway, Studio B holds so many memories for me.
It really does.
Right? Like all those days, like doing group projects and panicking like hours before grit.
I know, that's literally like, that's what everyone says. And I'm like, it's so, I don't know. I feel like I liked it because it was like the only studio with windows. So it's the only studio that gave like FCAT students actual perception of time.
Yeah.
As to like your like late night. Anyways, kind of going, we already talked about our FCAT lives, but kind of starting from the beginning, way back when you were a young student, kind of talk me through the process of how you kind of came into FCAT and what really interested you into this field.
Yeah, so I actually came into FCAT in a very different way. So like I knew about FCAT in high school, but I actually started SFU in economics. And like at the time, like I was still exploring what do I want to do. So I was exploring BD, I was exploring comp sci at the time. And actually like I discovered, I looked into FCAT around summer 2013 and I took 2 electives and actually took very different electives than like what most non-FCAT students do before coming to FCAT. So I actually took IAT 110, but I also took IAT 167 as an elective because I did my first comp sci course in first year comp sci. And I'm like, maybe I want to explore like the FCAT side. I took that programming course and I'm like, this is kind of cool. So I thought about FCAT for another year. And then in my 3rd year, I finally said, I want to do this. So I jumped into the FCAT department and haven't looked back since.
So you mentioned that you had done comp sci and you kind of got interested in it through like the programming field. So was that kind of your trajectory or like did it, because you're working as a product designer, which is not very like coding heavy. So kind of how did that transition happen?
Yeah, so for me, like I was always interested in kind of the business side in terms of case studies. So I was super interested at the time in marketing case studies. But then I found that maybe it's not marketing I want to do, is like I actually want to do kind of actual products. But that was always in the back of my head. I actually started doing video first, and I actually did a video co-op first, and then for the provincial government. And from there, I worked on BC's implementation of electronic healthcare records. And from there, like moving like from a paper-based system to a digital-based system was super cool in terms of this idea of digital transformation. And for me, that made me realize that I didn't want to be on the side communicating it. I wanted to actually be doing this. And that's what really led me into UX at the end of the day.
you're obviously talking about your co-op. So you started with the videography co-op. How many co-ops did you end up doing? 3?
I ended up doing 3 co-ops, so about 2 years of co-op. So
yeah, that's a long time to be doing co-op. So now, so you mentioned that it was like the digital transformation that kind of led you into where you wanted to go forward. So you started at Vancouver Coastal Health. And then let's see what I can remember off of me lurking on your LinkedIn page. And then you did and then you mentioned you did a UX co-op. And then what was your last co-op?
Yeah, so I did the UX co-op for 4 months at the city of Vancouver. And then I ended up doing a full 16-month internship at SAP as a UX design intern on Analytics Cloud.
Very cool. And so then I think at this point you were at the end of your graduation.
So like I started pretty much as an 8-month co-op at SAP, and then they decided to extend me. So I spent another 8 months there just as, in a sense, like a contracted intern. So yeah.
Cool. And how was that? Because I mean, SAP is like one of the, I guess, the big names at FCAT. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience there and how it felt like working with such a big corporation?
Yeah, so I was very lucky to work on a product called Analytics Cloud, which is kind of a BI database platform. So think about like Microsoft Excel, but at a higher scale, like for large companies and data sets. So it was super interesting working for that company, and especially because SAP is such an engineering-driven company that that they're starting to embrace design. So it was super interesting to be kind of part of that embracing of design and UX. And I think that it's interesting to work in a big company, even though like there are big processes that you have to follow, and of course there are politics. It's a really good place to learn because you learn how to design at scale. Because I think in CIAT we definitely like are designing at a smaller scale, but of course once customers are paying for a software, you have to make sure that, hey, like this software has to work for people who have like 100 employees or who have like 10,000 employees. So it's definitely a challenge to design for.
I've been talking to friends who are doing co-op, and they talk about the same thing. It's like, even though we're working in CIAT with like different companies and things like that for projects, like once you go out there and there's people actually like paying you and they're like expecting things from you, like on a bigger, larger, like I guess more of an impacted scale, it's very like stressful, and it really like either turns people into like, oh my God, this is so fun and so exciting, or like,
yeah, exactly.
So I guess your current job, so as you mentioned, is a junior product designer at Jostle. How did that come? Did that come about from another co-op, or was this just like you job searching after you graduated?
Yeah, so this came up in a job search after graduation. I think I actually found Jostle because one of my former co-op friends from SAP actually was a co-op at Jostle. So I think that's initially how I found out about Jostle, and like I'm like, oh cool, congrats, dude, you got the job. And then I peeked on like the Jostle page and I'm like, hey, they're hiring a product designer. So,
it's like, oh, me too.
Yeah, but the job search is definitely like, the job search was how I found Jostle, because I was applying for jobs since about January 2020, and then I landed my first interview around late May, early June.
Wow, yeah, that's a hassle. So I guess, I mean, because you did graduate like right at the beginning of lockdown and all of that for the pandemic, like how was that doing a kind of like because I feel like the students now that are graduating are still feeling the impacts of that initial like drop. So how was that for you?
Yeah, it was tough. I was actually still looking for internships at the time, but a lot of internships ended up getting canceled. So that's when I said I might as well just graduate. But it's a very tough market out there because a lot of designers did get laid off like right at the beginning of the pandemic. So of course the companies that were hiring, they ended up scooping up those designers. And even to this day, there really is a lack of junior jobs out there. And I initially like this job for Jostle, I think was more so advertised at the intermediate level because they were looking for someone with 3 years experience, and I only technically have almost just about a year and a half of UX experience. So thankfully they gave me a chance, and I'm really thankful for that. but yeah, it's tough. Like when I interviewed for jobs, like for intermediate, and even I interviewed for some senior level positions, they're like, yeah, like we like your experience, you just don't have enough experience in the field.
And we like your experience, but there's not enough of it.
Exactly.
That's so, it's like the worst thing ever, especially like once you're right out of graduation, you're like, this is why I'm here to gather experience.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tough.
It's definitely tough. So kind of talking about Jostle and your journey here. So what do you exactly work on as a product designer at this company?
So I'm very lucky that Jostle is a startup and we are a smaller team. So I get to focus on like very specific areas of the product. And for me, I'm the sole designer in a sense in kind of determining the future of the features I designed. So of course, just to give some context, Jostle we are in a sense an employee intranet we help leaders build connected organizations so that everyone can work and unite and grow together. So even though Jostle has been around for a bit, we've helped over 1,000 organizations, and we help industry-leading employee participation rates. And it's a really interesting place to be because we're building an employee intranet that is different than your typical intranet, which is page-based. We want to focus more so on what matters most to people and organizations. And it's really cool to kind of really build out that vision as a product designer.
Yeah, especially with startups, you have so much say and so much control of the future of how it's going to progress. So it's kind of scary almost to think about as this like, it's like I am making the final decisions. Like,
that's the thing that really shocked me. Like when I first got into the field, like as a UX and product designer, it's this idea that you are in a sense responsible for the design at the end of the day. Like you, in a sense, have to make the final call sometimes between like balancing product management, balancing engineering, and thinking about what really is the best practices for UX and what is going to be the future of this feature. Because of course you don't want to mess something up because you need the feature to scale up at the end of the day.
Yeah. I guess working on a scale that doesn't even working to design for a scale that doesn't exist yet is that's a lot of future thinking. That's a lot of wrinkly brain work.
It is definitely.
I guess what I'm really curious about is, so you're working at Jostle and you have so much as a startup, it's very hands-on. You kind of have your foot in different I don't know what the euphemism is, but you're kind of doing everything. But then you also came off of a year and a half at SAP, which is super company-based. There's a strict order to everything. You're kind of confined to the role that you're playing. So I guess if you have really unique experiences, do you have can you kind of speak to what it's like to work for two different types of company setups?
So my analogy is always this idea of a pie. So in a big company, you're a small piece of a big pie. And in a large company, you're a small piece of a big pie. But a small company, you're a big piece of a small pie. So for me, it's this idea of you get to create more impact at the end of the day, usually at a smaller company, because you get to really work on robust features and kind of areas of the product that are beginning to grow at scale. So to me, that's definitely why I gravitated towards, I wanted to try working more so for a startup right after graduation, because I had that kind of I got to work for the big company, but I never worked for a small company before. The biggest difference I found between big companies like SAP and small companies like Jostle is that the pacing of product design. So at a big company like SAP, sometimes design moves a bit slower at the end of the day. So when I was designing features at SAP, I would have the designs ready, but sometimes there wasn't a development team ready to take it on yet. Or in the case when I worked on on like different teams, sometimes you have to wait for the technical resources to become available. So for example, you need APIs like from like one area of the product to communicate with the APIs of another area of the product. So there is kind of that bigger delay in a bigger company. Something that was super refreshing I found at Jostle in a small company, which I really like, is that if I can propose a design, like the design is pretty much almost ready to go into development, and could even go into development like next week. Like the feature I'm designing right now, like today or yesterday that I presented on, it's going into it's going to be engineered starting next week. So that's a super refreshing change that I really like about kind of smaller startups. And also like the big advantage to me about a startup is that you do have more of a voice at the end of the day. So I get to really help impact product decisions, and I actually work directly with the CEO, who's the product manager of the company. So that was scary at first, reporting directly into the CEO of the company as a junior product designer, but yeah, it's super refreshing because I really like this idea of like how, as a designer, I can really make a significant impact at the end of the day to the product, which is a nice, refreshing change.
Yeah, I think that's something. I mean, oh well. First off, you like reporting to the CEO. Like I heard about that, and I was like, oh my god, I can feel your stress. I can just imagine like a small little like junior was like, hi. But that's I think that's the main thing that I've heard the most is it's you. I feel with like bigger companies, yeah, they're super cool to work at, but you don't get to really see or feel like where that all that work that you're doing, where it's kind of going. But with the startup, you have so much impact, as you mentioned, that like any small little like idea that you make gets immediately like, oh, let's talk about this more. Oh, or oh, how can we expand on this? So you get to really feel that like, oh, I actually have a lot of impact and growth here.
And also I think it's important to realize like also like that, yes, like startups do pay less than big companies, and I think that compensation like does attract, like some people want bigger compensation at the end of the day, which is totally understandable. But one of the greatest lessons I learned from a mentor was that in your 20s is the time to learn, and in your 30s is the time to earn. And I really took that to heart because like I did, like during my job process, I did interview for bigger companies who were of course going to offer like higher compensation, but to me, like I found that I didn't sometimes resonate as well with the big companies. And to me, like I've never worked for a startup before, and I'm like, I might as well try that when I'm still in my 20s and kind of really explore that to see if that's what I want in the future. So
Yeah, I think that's such a good. I've never heard of that, and I don't know why. Because that's the 20s is your time to learn, and 30s is your time to earn. Because I feel like soon as we graduate, we have this weird expectation of get a job, to immediately become financially stable, and then like live out the rest of your life like this. When in reality, I think through everyone that I've talked to has been like, yeah, I've like switched 3 jobs. I'm doing like completely different from what I started out with, because it's the reality is that you're not going to find what you immediately love or are really passionate about right away.
exactly. Yeah. And even like when people like when students go do co-op searching, I encourage students not to be picky about like too picky about the companies that you first like for your first step in the door. I think it's more so important that you do begin to build up that experience from like your co-op days, and then as you graduate, like even like when you work for as a junior product designer, it's okay to kind of take a pay cut in compensation for kind of what will you gain in experience in terms of driving products at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think that's what, like, I mean, we were talking earlier about how companies are like, I want 3 to 5 years of experience. And you're like, ah,
Mhm,
but I think that's exactly it, like, kind of with that mentality where you
mhm,
take the time right now to really, like, get that experience. And it's not just like one type of experience. Like any job that you do, you'll learn so much, you'll gain so many outcomes from it, like, and opportunities that will really, like, aid you in the future. I don't think there's any job that really will hinder you um, as you go forward. If you're able to like walk me through your day to day at Jostle.
mhm. Yeah, so pretty much my day-to-day is a bunch of stand-ups. So I work on different areas of the product. So we have stand-ups, which is a place where like the engineers and product management usually get together to talk about what they're doing for the week. And then from there, I usually do kind of one-on-ones with my manager every 2 weeks. So kind of talking about how I want to grow at the company. And then I also do a lot of individual one-on-ones with developers as I'm designing features, because as a product designer, you need to really think about feasibility at the end of the day, along with scalability, and this is technically possible. So making sure that I do those things with my with the developers I work with and product managers to really think about how can we scale up a product. Because when it comes to a design review, when you get all the stakeholders in a room to either give it the green light or the red light, you need to really have all your use cases very robust and everything pretty much well in place. Like even like before this recording today, I just came out of a design review, like of a feature I was working on for about a month and a half.
Man, I'm so sorry. I like really caught you at a real stress time.
Oh no worries about it. It was a design. It was a really fun design review. So
okay, I'm glad that it's going well. So you are very new. You're still kind of, fresh out and of school and still are kind of like working your way up. So I guess for you just personally, where do you see yourself going? I mean, like not just company wise, but more like personal development and kind of the roles you want to play in the future. Because as I mentioned, you do also do podcasting. And so this is obviously like an interest of yours. So yeah, where do you see yourself like, I guess, personally developing in the career field, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So I really still would like to be like maybe a senior product designer, maybe 5 years from now, or a design lead. I really like this, how challenging product design is, because you are solving a puzzle in a sense at the end of the day, but a digital puzzle, and it's super cool to really be in a sense on the forefront of pushing out software that thousands of people could use at the end of the day, or in the case of SAP, millions of people use even potentially. So to me, even like I'm thinking about product management in the future and taking product management courses, because what I found with product design is that you need to both kind of have this knowledge of, in a sense, how engineering works, to think about how the scalability of your design is going to work, but also the product management side. So thinking about what is the business aspect of this, how are customers going to use this, how can this scale in like 5 years from now for customers. So it's important to not only understand the business side, the technical side, and also the design side. It's important that you understand all three. It's in a sense this idea of the design unicorn, except that's what you really need to do to succeed in product design.
Wait, what's the design? What's the design unicorn?
The design unicorn?
Yeah.
It's like there's this like mystical idea that the ideal product designer is someone who can code, someone who can design, and someone who has business knowledge. It was something I learned in FCAT. So one of my profs.
As someone who's kind of fresh in their career, but you've also done a lot in during your time in FCAT and kind of your degree, what would be, and you also came from a background of like economics and comp sci, and like, so you really have gone through a journey to kind of get to where you are. So what would be like, what advice would you give to kind of students right now who, I mean, I guess they're almost in like their final year, like what advice would you give to them as they kind of step forward into the real, quote unquote, real world?
Yes. So I highly recommend that students do co-op, and I would also recommend that students be very open to trying small companies, medium companies, large companies, or even like different kind of areas like government, for example. I find that a lot of students, when they start co-op, they want to go like to Google, Facebook, like Fangle, companies like SAP, and like that's great, but it's very, like for me, like when I applied to work at SAP, I actually, over the past, since 2016, I applied like multiple times. I got rejected already twice from 2 different teams at SAP beforehand over the past like 3 years. And then like my 3rd time I applied to SAP, like with the interview, I finally landed the job. And I think it's important that students do explore other areas, because working in government taught me so much. Working at a startup has taught me different lessons, and working at SAP has taught me different lessons. And I really like to have a diversified set of experiences before I decide like where I want to land in my final career at the end of the day.
So they've applied to a bunch of jobs now. They're in that job interview process. What advice would you give students at that process?
My advice is really determine what do you stand for as a designer. I think that design is important because you need to have a voice in design. Like, what do you want to do as a designer to impact the products you design at the end of the day? So for me, like, my ethos is that I want to be able to build products that can help people be better at the end of the day. So to me, that resonated like with the city of Vancouver, because I wanted to help people vote at the end of the day. I wanted to help people, guide them to city information. Like when I was at SAP, I want to be able to help businesses make better business decisions at the end of the day, whether they're a big company or a small company. Because even like with the product we designed, it was actually used by a hospital in the US to help track COVID patients in like COVID bed units in ICU, I think. And then even today at Jostle, like we're helping organizations at the end of the day build better. So to me, that's what really I think is important, is like, what do you stand for as a designer? Because there's lots of bootcamp grads there now. There's tons of CED grads, and everyone's applying for the same job. So what's going to make you stand out at the end of the day? And to me, that's just your stance as a designer.
So kind of going into like staying on your job search, what do you think one thing that you did that really helped you kind of, I guess, especially during like, job search, really like differentiate you and really help you to become a bit more, I guess, ready for industry?
For me, it's about reflecting on a project. So for me, I've redesigned 2 academic projects in the past. So I redesigned my IAT 234 project, and then I also did a small mini redesign to one of my IAT 438 projects as I got feedback through the months after my project finished. And I think that it's super important that you can reflect on what you've done in the past, because usually like in a big product organization like SAP and even at Jostle, like you're working on existing products. You're not sometimes designing something brand new from scratch. You need to think about kind of what were problematic areas that we implemented in the past, and how can that be fixed for the future. So to me, those exercises really helped me actually get my foot in the door, because even like doing side projects as well. Because my first co-op, I got the job because I did side projects for like videography, and then for the city of Vancouver, they really liked the redesign I did for my IAT app, and that's ultimately how I got the job. So I think it's important that you can, in a sense, redesign areas of your projects that you've done in the past. And also it works really well in interviews, because then they can see very specific areas that you designed. Because one big problem is that with group projects is sometimes employers question, okay, what aspect did you specifically work on? So if you're able to kind of redesign areas of the product with very sound reasoning, then that kind of showcases like, hey, I did this, like this is my redesign that I did. So yeah, I think that's
really
important.
Showing you what you're capable of, not just what your like group made. So
yeah, because like usually like once you get into like a big product organization, sometimes you're on your own with the design and you're responsible for it. So there's not always like group work in like big organizations. Sometimes like you do collaborate on projects, but there are projects where kind of you are the sole designer responsible.
We're coming to an end. I usually like to ask a very thought-provoking question towards the end. So my question is, what inanimate object would you eliminate from existence? If there's this one random inanimate object that you're like, just doesn't need to exist, what would that be?
That's a very good question. Ooh. Sometimes I wish I could eliminate my phone, to be honest. I feel like even though like I work in the digital field, sometimes I feel like I'm so connected in at the end of the day, and especially like during remote work and kind of hybrid work, sometimes I just want to shut off. So if I could just like eliminate my phone sometimes, I think that would be something that I would like to do.
Really do. Yeah, I feel like they really need to bring back like flip phones with like just like limited capabilities. They get done what they need to do, and then you're just like, you flip it over and you're shut out from the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's like I miss like I haven't used a flip phone in ages, but like I kind of wish I could do the fact where I don't like this and like just snap the phone.
Thank you so much for coming into my virtual little studio. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and talk about, the varied experience that you have, and you had some really good insights especially into like current students and helping them progress into their future. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Senior students definitely helped me out when I was a young and bean as a CS student. So.
If you enjoyed the episode, please let us know by following us on Spotify or reaching out to us on our Instagram @SFU. Other than that, we'll catch you in the studio next time. After School is a podcast project from Simon Fraser University's Faculty of Communication, Art, and Technology. This has been our conversation with Jordan Yep, hosted by Amena Salman. The After School podcast is created by Tessa Arsenault, Emma Keeler-Dugas, Stacey Coplin, myself, Paige Smith, and each of our student hosts. You can learn more about SFU's Faculty of Communication, Art, and Technology at our website, sfu.ca/FCAT. And you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn with our handle FCAT@SFU. That's FCAT@SFU. You can learn more about SFU's School of Interactive Art and Technology at sfu.ca/SIAT. And you can follow them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at SIATSFU. Next time on After School, we'll be hosting a conversation with Kristen Richter, co-founder and creator of The Social Agency and alumna of SFU's School of Communications. See you next time.